All right, continuing with chapter 5, called Rome and the Rise of Christianity, I want to reiterate the fact that the reason why we study Rome is because of their huge impact to the world. And remember, this is the empire that became the largest and most powerful empire in history up to this point. All right, section 2 is called From the Republic to an Empire. So you can see that the government is going to evolve from a republic to an empire, and we're going to talk about how that happened. Section 2 talks about how the plebeians and the patricians were continually unequal, and it caused a lot of issues in ancient Rome. And the Senate is the one that really became the true power in Rome, not the elected consuls or the elected tribunes, but it was really in essence the Senate that was running everything, because the Senate were mostly aristocrats or upper class. Once they were elected as a senator, they were a senator for life. They were in charge of directing the wars, and they also decided to take charge of not only domestic policies but foreign policies, and that included the financial affairs of the Roman Republic. However, the small farmers were still the crucial portion to ancient Rome because of the fact that they were part of the army. And because the poor or the plebeians were unable to compete with the upper class or patricians, they became known as the landless poor, because they would lose their land to the wealthy because they could no longer either farm it or pay for the taxes. So there were two brothers that came along that were going to try to change this, and they were the Gracchus brothers, and these were elected plebeians or tribunes, and Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus both passed land reform bills that gave that land back to the poor so that there was a little bit more equality. Obviously, this was going to infuriate these senators, especially the ones that were the rich landowners. And so because of that, what you're going to see is a theme that continues throughout this chapter, or at least this section, that if you upset the Senate, who was the most powerful group in ancient Rome, you would probably find yourself dead. And that's exactly what happened to Tiberius in 133 BC. And later on, his brother Gaius was also killed by the Senate. All right, now we're going to talk about how the role of the army really changed what happened in ancient Rome. Marius was a Roman general that started to recruit soldiers and promised to give them land. And so in essence, he was bribing them to be part of his Roman army. And that made these soldiers very loyal to Marius, but not so loyal to the ideals of Rome and the betterment of Rome. And so this is the first time that the army was not under the government control, and of course that troubled the Senate. So the Senate gave Lucius Cornelius Sulla command of an army in Asia Minor with the hopes that he could defeat Marius. And there was a civil war between Marius and his armies and Sulla and his armies, and Sulla won. And at this point, then Sulla took control over Rome because, of course, he had proven his power. However, he was supposed to be the leader for only 6 months, but he ended up being a dictator for 2 years. And he did things like killing anyone that opposed anything he had to say or do. And, of course, he was not one of Rome's greatest leaders. It was at this point that, of course, it was clear that the Republic was no longer going to exist because Sulla was in charge of Rome as one person versus having the two consuls and the Senate ruling. And so over the next 50 years, there were many civil wars and various leaders that took over Rome's control. And so in 60 BC, they established the first triumvirate. And a triumvirate, based by its name, if you look at the prefix, tri, of course, meaning three, a triumvirate was a government led by 3 people, and these 3 people were to have equal power. And remember, this comes from the ideas of the Republic of not wanting to have be ruled by a king or a queen. And so they always wanted to have multiple people controlling their government. That's why they elected 2 consuls, and now they have a triumvirate. In the first triumvirate, the members of the first triumvirate were Pompey, and Pompey had military control in Spain, and so of course he proved his powers through military success. And Crassus. Crassus was in the military as well, but mostly just because he was an upper class. He was actually the richest man in Rome, and so of course he had a lot of power due to that. So he took command in Syria, and unfortunately he was killed a short time later in 53 BC. Now the third member of the triumvirate, and probably the most powerful, was Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar had military control in Gaul, which is present-day France, and he had many, many successes in the military. As a matter of fact, one of his victories in Asia Minor, he said the famous quote, "Veni, vidi, vici," which is Latin, meaning I came, I saw, I conquered. And so that is a contribution today as well. Maybe not the Latin version, but definitely the English version. So let's take a look at your maps again on the last page in your packets. In section 1, we labeled Italy. We labeled the city of Rome, the Tiber River, which Rome is on, the Mediterranean Sea, the city of Carthage, which of course was significant in the Punic Wars, the northern portion of Africa, which was then the Roman province called Africa, the Alps Mountains, which protected the Italian peninsula, the island of Sicily, Rome's first province, Spain, another province Rome acquired, Macedonia, and Greece, 2 other European provinces that Rome controlled. The first Asian province was in Pergamum. And now we're going to label Gaul because Rome controlled Gaul or parts of Gaul as well because of what Julius Caesar did. All right, so the senators voted to have Pompey rule the government alone and told Caesar to give up his command. Clearly the Senate was seeing that Caesar was very powerful with his military strength, and they wanted him out because they were fearful for their own power. Caesar knew something was up, and so he refused to give up his command of his army, and he decided to march into Italy. And at this point, it virtually started another civil war. And once he crossed the Rubicon River, he knew there was no turning back. And so the quote, "crossing the Rubicon," is one of the contributions, meaning you're at a point beyond any return. And that's what crossing the Rubicon means. So Caesar went into Italy, defeated Pompey and his army, and Caesar was named the dictator of Rome in 45 BC.
Third and fourth hour study halls will be meeting in the media